Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take you beyond the headlines, and today's topic is, well, it's fascinating and a little unsettling.
Yeah.
Bioweapons.
Mm-hmm.
In the age of genetic engineering, we've got some sources for you today, and our mission is kind of unpack how real this threat is and what the potential dangers are.
Yeah, the thing that makes this topic so interesting is that it's like this intersection of cutting-edge science and humanities.
Right.
Shall we say,
Yeah.
not so great tendencies.
Not always the best track record.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not exactly light reading, but it is important, and the sources point out that this isn't just some far-off sci-fi scenario.
Right.
This is happening now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's rewind a second and get some context. The sources mention how biowarfare actually has a pretty long history.
Absolutely. It's not a new concept at all. In fact, the sources give some pretty grim examples, like catapulting plague-ridden corpses over city walls during medieval sieges.
Oh, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it shows how long humans have been trying to weaponize disease, right?
Right.
But the sources argue that genetic engineering, that's a whole different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it so different from just using, say, a naturally occurring virus?
Well, instead of just using what nature gives us,
Yeah.
genetic engineering lets us manipulate the very building blocks of life.
Right.
DNA. You can think of DNA as the instruction manual for an organism. And with genetic engineering, we can actually edit those instructions.
So instead of just finding a virus out in nature and weaponizing it,
Yeah.
we're saying scientists could actually tweak it in a lab
Exactly.
to make it more deadly,
Mm-hmm.
or even engineer entirely new pathogens from scratch.
Exactly. The sources talk about the potential for creating designer diseases, pathogens that are tailored
Oh, wow.
for specific purposes. For instance, imagine a virus that spreads as easily as the common cold,
Right.
but attacks the nervous system like rabies.
That's the level of threat we're talking about.
Yeah, that's the level.
Okay, that is terrifying, and the source points out that this isn't just theoretical. The technology to do this is advancing rapidly.
Yes, and it's becoming more accessible, too. I mean, that's one of the things the sources really highlight is the democratization of these tools.
Right.
It's no longer just nation states with top secret labs that can dabble in this stuff.
Right. The source mentions high school students doing genetic experiments,
Yeah.
DIY biohacking kits that you can buy online.
It's pretty crazy.
I mean, that's both amazing and scary at the same time.
It really is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's incredible that these powerful tools are becoming so widely available. You know, potentially this could lead to breakthroughs in medicine,
Right.
all sorts of fields. But on the other hand, it raises serious concerns about misuse.
Like, what if somebody with malicious intent gets their hands on this tech? The source uses the term lone wolf. Somebody acting alone, not affiliated with any government or organization.
Exactly. And that's a nightmare scenario for security agencies.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine trying to prevent a bio attack when the perpetrator could be anyone, anywhere, with access to relatively cheap and easy-to-use technology.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But the haystack is the entire world and the needle is invisible.
Yeah, right. And there's another layer of complexity that the source highlights: attribution.
Okay.
With the nuclear weapon, you can usually tell who launched it, but with these genetically engineered pathogens, tracing it back to the source is incredibly difficult.
So you could have a devastating attack,
Mm-hmm.
mass casualties, global panic, and no one knows who to blame, let alone how to retaliate.
Exactly. And that lack of accountability
Yeah.
is a major concern. It raises the chances that someone might use these weapons knowing they probably won't get caught.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about the lone wolves, but the source also delves into how nation states might use this technology.
Yeah.
That's a whole other level of scary, right?
Absolutely. But what's interesting is that a lot of countries are investing heavily in genetic engineering research, but it's often framed as being defensive.
Okay.
You know, developing vaccines, countermeasures in case of an attack.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface, but the source suggests it's not that simple.
Right. The problem is that the same knowledge and tools you use to develop a vaccine could also be used to create a bioweapon.
Oh, wow.
The line between offense and defense can get really blurry.
So you could have this situation where countries are racing to develop defenses, but that inadvertently fuels the development of even more dangerous weapons.
Right, potentially leading to a bioarms race where each nation feels like it has to develop more sophisticated and more deadly weapons just to keep up with its rival.
Which is frankly terrifying. But it gets worse, right? The source also talks about non-state actors like terrorist groups.
Mm.
How does this tech play into their hands?
Well, one of the things that's really concerning is that unlike nuclear weapons, which require massive resources and infrastructure, bioweapons are relatively cheap and easy to develop.
So a relatively small group without a lot of money or sophisticated equipment
Hmm.
could potentially create something truly devastating.
Think back to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
Now imagine that, but with a virus that was intentionally engineered to be even more contagious and deadly, and then you factor in the difficulty of tracing it back to the source.
Yeah.
I mean, it paints a pretty grim picture.
It certainly does, and the source makes it clear this isn't just a theoretical threat.
Right.
The potential for this to happen is real, and the consequences could be catastrophic.
That's exactly. It's a real wake-up call
Yeah.
to the challenges we face in the 21st century. I mean,
Yeah.
this technology has amazing potential for good, but it also has this dark side that we can't ignore.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, and it's been pretty heavy stuff. But the source doesn't just lay out the problem, it also explores some potential solutions. So in part 2 of this deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit and explore those solutions, examine what's being done, and what more needs to happen to prevent this nightmare scenario from becoming a reality. Welcome back to the deep dive. If you just joined us, we're exploring the unsettling world of bioweapons in the age of genetic engineering.
Right.
Part 1, we dug into the dangers,
Mm-hmm.
and let's be honest, it got pretty dark.
Yeah.
But the source material doesn't just leave us hanging with a sense of impending doom.
Right.
It also explores some potential solutions. So let's dive into those.
Yeah. It's important to remember that while the threat is real and it's serious, it's not insurmountable.
Okay.
There are things we can do, both individually and collectively,
Right.
to mitigate these risks.
Okay, that's reassuring. So where do we even begin? The source mentions international agreements as a starting point. What's the thinking there?
Well, the idea is to establish a global framework that specifically bans the development and use of genetically engineered bioweapons. Think of it like the treaties we have for nuclear weapons, but tailored for this new era of biotechnology.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But the source also points out a problem with this approach. Something about existing treaties being outdated.
Exactly. Treaties like the Biological Weapons Convention were drafted long before CRISPR and other gene editing techniques were even a glimmer in a scientist's eye. They just haven't kept pace with these rapid advancements in technology.
So it's kind of like trying to regulate self-driving cars using laws written for horse-drawn carriages.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Right.
We need updated agreements that specifically address the unique challenges posed by genetic engineering. And these agreements need to be comprehensive, they need to be enforceable, and they need to have buy-in from countries all over the world.
Which, let's face it, is a tall order. Getting global consensus on anything is tough, especially when you're dealing with something as sensitive as national security and cutting-edge technology.
Absolutely, but it's crucial. Without a clear international framework that outlaws these weapons, we risk a dangerous free-for-all where every nation is left to its own devices. And that could quickly escalate into a bioarms race with unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences.
Okay, so updated treaties are important, but what else can be done? The source also emphasizes the need for transparency and cooperation, especially when it comes to scientific research. Why is that so important in this context?
Because the more we know about what others are doing, the better equipped we'll be to identify potential threats and develop countermeasures.
Right.
Open communication and data sharing can help build trust and prevent misunderstandings that could lead to unnecessary escalation.
So more sharing of information, more collaboration between scientists and governments across borders.
Exactly. Imagine if scientists in different countries are working on similar research, but they're operating in silos, unaware of each other's progress. That could lead to duplication of effort, missed opportunities for collaboration, and even suspicion and distrust.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where everyone has a few pieces, but no one is sharing what they have.
Right. By fostering transparency and collaboration, we can create a more open and interconnected scientific community, which is essential for addressing a global challenge like this.
The source also highlights the need for increased public awareness. Why is that so crucial? I mean, most of us aren't scientists or policymakers, so what can we really do?
It's about creating a more informed and engaged public that understands the risks and potential consequences of this technology. The more people who are aware of the issue, the more pressure there will be on governments and institutions to act responsibly and prioritize safety.
So it's not just about scientists and policymakers working behind closed doors. It's about bringing the conversation out into the open and engaging the public in a meaningful way.
Exactly. We need to demystify this technology and have open and honest discussions about its potential benefits and risks.
Right.
Think of it like the conversations we've had around climate change or artificial intelligence. The more we talk about it, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions and demand responsible action from our leaders.
Okay, so we've talked about international agreements, transparency, public awareness. But what about the scientific front? Are there any specific steps being taken to develop defenses against these potential bioweapons?
There are, and the source goes into some detail about the efforts underway. One of the most promising areas of research is in the development of rapid diagnostics.
So if there were an attack, we'd be able to quickly identify the pathogen and hopefully develop a way to treat it or contain its spread.
Yeah.
Kind of like what we saw with COVID-19, but ideally much faster and more effective.
Yes, that's the goal. Scientists are working on technologies that can rapidly sequence the genome of an unknown pathogen, which allows them to identify it and potentially develop targeted treatments or vaccines much faster than traditional methods.
And what about vaccines? Is there any progress being made on developing vaccines that could protect against a wider range of genetically engineered pathogens?
That's a big focus of research right now,
Yeah.
and it's incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
The sheer variety and potential for customization with genetically engineered pathogens make it almost impossible to prepare for every scenario. Imagine trying to create a vaccine that protects against every possible variation of the flu virus.
Right.
It's a daunting task.
That sounds like trying to hit a constantly moving target.
It is, and that's why scientists are exploring new approaches to vaccine development. One promising avenue is the development of universal vaccines.
Okay.
That could provide broad protection against a whole class of pathogens rather than targeting specific strains.
So instead of trying to create a unique vaccine for every single engineered pathogen,
Right.
we could have a few broad-spectrum vaccines that offer more general protection.
That's the idea. But it's still early days. It's a complex challenge.
Yeah.
But scientists are making progress. And in addition to vaccines, there's also a lot of research being done on new therapies that could help treat infections caused by engineered pathogens, even if we don't have a specific vaccine.
This is all very encouraging. It sounds like a lot of brilliant minds are working on this problem,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a real sense of urgency. But the source also emphasizes that this is a global challenge that requires a coordinated global response.
Absolutely. The challenges posed by genetically engineered bioweapons are too complex and too high stakes for any one nation to tackle alone. We need a global effort that involves scientists, governments, and the public, all working together to address this threat.
It's a bit like climate change in that sense. It's the problem that affects everyone, and it requires cooperation and collaboration on an unprecedented scale.
Exactly. And just like with climate change, delaying action will only make the problem worse and increase the risks. We need to act now, and we need to act together.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in terms of potential solutions, from international treaties to cutting-edge science.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another layer to this conversation that we need to explore: the ethical implications. How do we balance the incredible potential of genetic engineering with the very real risks that we've been discussing?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's something we'll delve into deeper in part 3 of this deep dive, because ultimately this isn't just a technological challenge, it's an ethical one.
So join us for the final part of this exploration as we grapple with the bigger picture and the questions that will shape the future of genetic engineering. Welcome back to The Deep Dive.
We spent the last 2 parts exploring the world of bioweapons and genetic engineering.
Right.
The terrifying potential, the race for solutions. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But now for this final part, we need to shift gears a bit and tackle the ethical questions surrounding all of this. Because as the source points out, this isn't just a scientific or political issue.
It's a fundamental question about what it means to be human in an age of such powerful technology.
That's precisely it. We can talk all day about treaties and technology.
Right.
But at its core, this is about choices, values, responsibility. It's about deciding what kind of future we want to create with these tools.
And that's a heavy topic, right? I mean,
Yep.
on the one hand, genetic engineering holds incredible promise for good. The sources mention curing diseases, improving agriculture, maybe even reversing climate change.
Hmm.
It's mind-blowing stuff.
Absolutely. The potential is immense. But as you said, the flip side is that this same power could be used to create weapons of unimaginable horror. And that's the ethical dilemma we're facing. How do we harness this incredible power for good while safeguarding against its darker potential?
It's like being handed a toolbox with the power to build a utopia or unleash a nightmare.
Yeah.
And the choice is ours.
And the source doesn't offer any easy answers.
Right.
And rightfully so. These are complex questions with no simple solutions. But it does highlight some key points for consideration. One that struck me is this idea that this isn't just a problem for governments or scientists to solve. It's a responsibility we all share.
That's a powerful point. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of something this big and complex, like it's beyond our control. But the source is arguing that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of this technology.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the decisions made by scientists, by policymakers, and even everyday citizens will determine the path we take. Will we prioritize safety and ethics, or will we succumb to the allure of power and control no matter the cost?
So what can we as individuals do about this? The source mentions education as a starting point.
That's crucial. The more we understand about this technology, both its potential and its perils, the better equipped we'll be to engage in these critical conversations and demand accountability from those in power.
So read up on the topic, follow the news, maybe even reach out to our elected officials
Yes.
to express our concerns and ask what they're doing to address this issue.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to engage in these conversations, even if they feel uncomfortable or overwhelming. Because silence only benefits those who would misuse this technology. Our voices matter. Our choices matter.
The source also talks about the need for a broader ethical framework, a set of guidelines that can help us navigate these incredibly complex decisions.
Right.
But who gets to decide what those guidelines are? And how do we even begin to create a framework that everyone can agree on, especially on a global scale?
That's the challenge, isn't it? There's no single answer. There's no magic formula. It requires open and honest dialogue, a willingness to listen to different perspectives, and a commitment to finding common ground even when there are disagreements.
It sounds like a monumental task,
It is.
but it also feels kind of hopeful.
Yeah.
Like maybe this shared challenge could be an opportunity for humanity to come together and figure out how to navigate this uncharted territory responsibly and ethically.
I agree. It's a daunting task, but it's also incredibly important because the choices we make today, both individually and collectively, will determine the kind of future we create.
And that brings us back to the question posed by the source. Will we rise to the occasion?
Mm-hmm.
Will we use this incredible power to build a better world, or will we allow it to become our undoing?
That's the question we all need to grapple with. There's no easy answer, but the future quite literally depends on how we choose to answer it.
Well, that's a powerful note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. It's been a heavy but incredibly important conversation. And remember, knowledge is power, especially when dealing with something this consequential.